This is Women Talking Mitzvot, brought to you by Deracheha and the Stella K. Abraham Migdal Oz Women's Beit Midrash as part of their commitment to bringing women's spiritual worlds into halachic discourse. This podcast series has been graciously sponsored by Sigal and Zach in honor of Women's Talmud Torah, Women's Halacha Study, and in merit of Am Yisrael. Today's conversation discusses meaningful ways to experience the Aseret Yemei Teshuva, the 10 days of repentance, and Yom Kippur, through an exploration of the halachic and communal tools used to mark them. Yom Kippur, while being our most intense day of the Jewish calendar year, has the potential to be perhaps our most joyful day of our Jewish experience. Hi, Shana.
Hi, Yosefa.
So as I have already said in our introduction, we're in a very intense time now leading up to Yom Kippur. And for some, it's even experienced as a stressful time, depending on how much different ideas have been ingrained in us and how much we really feel the deen, the idea that our judgment is sort of hanging over our head, hanging in the air. And I would also say that right now, both Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, who are both saying slichot now, everyone's kind of equally tired, depending obviously on how much we're getting to slichot, whether we're doing them at night or in the morning or at all. But what I really wanted to talk about today is how we can find meaning in this time period. I think in general, that's what we're always after, is how to take our halachic lives and our religious lives and our relationship with God and find meaning in all of these structures that we're constantly a part of. So I'm curious where you are right now in this time period.
First of all, I really also experienced this time as very intense. Even just the fact that we're trying to squeeze so much into a very compact amount of time. You know, like just finished Rosh Hashanah and Tzom Gedalia today when this is being released, and it's Aseret Yemei Teshuva, and we're preparing for Yom Kippur, even just recovering from the draining, uplifting but draining experience of Rosh Hashanah, the hours in shul, the big meals, the tashlich. So I think that that's a very normal experience. I don't go to slichot every night the way that I used to when I was in high school and college. Partly also when I was in high school, like in my father's shul, it was at 10 o'clock at night. Like it wasn't so hard to go out there, and also didn't go on for so long. But we know that the slichot experience that we're a part of in Migdal Oz is so beautiful, but also so intense and so exhausting. And I feel like if I would go every day, it would just break me as a mother, probably first and foremost. And I don't think that would be a good outcome in terms of the Aseret Yemei Teshuva. But when I do go, what I wanted to mention here is that beyond like the moving words of slichut and the singing and the repetition of the Yud Gimel Midot, the 13 attributes of God, which we repeat over and over, I think just the experience, for me at least, of breaking from my routine is very, very powerful. The experience of like staying up very late at night, or for other people waking up early in the morning, that idea of like doing something different during these days, because it jolts us a little bit. Like it forces us out of like the repetitiveness of our daily life and makes us think a little bit from a new perspective. Like what's important to us? Are we happy with our day-to-day experience? Do we need to change it up sometimes? And I think that that ties into another concept during these days, which is that these days of Aseret Yemei Teshuva are days where we really try to work on ourselves. We talk about engaging in tshuva and in tefillah and in giving tzedakah. But besides that, there's also this idea that is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, for example, about even taking on a kind of practice that maybe you don't do all year, or maybe you don't even intend to continue during the year. Like the Shulchan Aruch speaks about maybe being careful to only eat Pat Yisrael, which is bread that's baked by Jews, which a lot of people are not only careful to eat that. And he says, take that on for the Aseret Yemei Teshuva, which sounds funny, like what, we're trying to trick God, or we're pretending that we're something that we're not, even if we know that we're not going to continue to be stringent in this way. And I don't think that's the idea. I think the idea is let's change it up a little bit, just to get us thinking about the fact that we are capable of change, that we could do something a little bit different, that the way that we did something yesterday doesn't have to be the way that we do something today. And therefore, even if it's something small, and even if it's something that maybe you won't succeed in staying with. And even if, by the way, it's not something religious, like there's religious things that we could take on, like being more careful in our brachot, or having more kavanah in our tefillah, or maybe learning a little bit more. Or, by the way, since our episode on Berachot HaShachar, I've been much more makpid with Netilat Yadayim, Biskutich, because that was not something that I was good about. And now I'm like, okay, I'm on that. So it could be little religious things, but it could also be trying to get more sleep, or eating healthier, or adding exercise into our routine, or stepping up when someone asks for a volunteer, or saying hello to people. So I really, really, really think that these days are a chance for us a little bit to focus on ways in which we want to maybe think about doing something different than what we used to.
I want to respond to that piece about the routine, because two things are coming up for me when you mention that. One is that, and I'm sure not the only one of the things that's really hard for me about this period of time is that the change of routine happens when the family routine of school has only just started gearing up again. And that's something that as the years have gone on, and I have Baruch Hashem, a bigger and bigger family, it's been more and more challenging for me, because I'm like, Elul often starts and it's still summer, and I'm like, wait, let me keep my summer. I need another week. Yeah. And then like everything just gets to start, and everyone just starts figuring out their schedule. And then it's like, boom, you're back into like this intense season of what everything that this season is that we've been speaking about. And so I just wanted to say that, meaning I agree with you. And I also know that I have a bit of like an internal resistance to it until it like hits me in the face, because I'm a very routinized person.
Yes, you've spoken about that.
Yes, and like my life only functions because it has like a lot of systems in place. Otherwise, I would forget everything, right? But I'm secretly a forgetful person, even though I cover it up pretty well. My father, Alav Shalom, was the same way. And one other piece I just wanted to say about the routine is that, Shane and I, we know my husband's away right now, and I really try and take these moments when they could be really stressful because something has changed, to always figure out how to change perspective on it. It's the exact same idea you're saying about tshuva, meaning how am I interacting with my family right now when this has changed? Or, oh, that's interesting, I'm behaving differently now than I did a week ago. And these are all these little things. In this case, it was, that's how it brought upon me, in the case of, he went away for work and things just shifted. But every time something like that shifts, even when there's an internal resistance, if we could like take a step back and observe ourselves in it, we gain a lot from the experience.
Yes. And I think like one of the ways in which I start the year often in Migdalos with students is trying to focus on something a place where we were successful in either changing our actions or changing our perspective, because this is a heavy time, an intense time. And often I think people go to that place of like, where am I lacking? What have I done wrong? How have I messed up? What chata'im, do I need to do tshuva for? And if we think a little bit about actually where's a place where you were successful in making a change? What's something that you struggled with that somehow you are no longer, struggling with? What's a perspective that you had that you've actually succeeded in thinking about differently? Sometimes we're like, oh, and how did I do that? Because if you take a step back and you reflect on that and you're like, oh, I'm acting differently, I'm thinking differently, how did I effectuate that change? That's much more motivating, than getting stuck in the like, what's wrong with us piece.
Yeah, totally.
So, the Rambam says in Hilchot Teshuva that a part of this time is kind of saying to Hashem, Ani acher ve'eni oto ha'ish. Not that I am a completely different person, but like, I'm capable of like doing, I'm capable of progressing. I'm capable of advancing. And therefore, hopefully, look upon me kindly because of that.
Yeah, I think, there are many models of tshuva out there. And the Rambam, even within his, prakim, includes several models. And we have different thinkers who've expounded upon them. Some of us may be familiar with Rav Soloveitchik's, ala tshuva, but there are many out there. But I just also want to say that expression of that I am somewhat of a different person is a more radical expression of tshuva. You've already expressed a softened view, which is where have I been successful at changing something in my life. But I also just want to bring up the idea of noseh avon, which is what we say in the Igor Midot, that God carries our sin, so to speak, or he carries it along with us. And Rav Soloveitchik, he also brings the idea of that I've changed, right? That I'm a different person. Let me have the deen, fall on somebody else because I'm no longer the person worthy of that. That he also speaks about how significant like the memory of sin is. Meaning when we have a sin that's carried, it's not sort of tainting us anymore because we've done tshuva, but the memory of what that was like. He speaks about the emotion of shame, like the emotion of where we were is something that, well, God can help us with that and help carry it for us. But that thought also, in theory, can motivate us to change our behavior in the future. So it's just I think it's a very different way of looking at the idea of change.
Not change that I'm a different person, that I've completely forgotten who I was and I've left that behind, but somehow incorporating that.
To be able to have sort of an organic experience where recognizing what was, recognizing where we want to go.
An integrated process.
Yeah, an integrated process, exactly. And I think also, while we do have these, it's not even really 10 days, right? But we have these 8 days where we're jumping ahead. I think most of us realize over a lifespan that real change is something that happens incrementally. Mm-hmm. Even for people who are good at making change, like lasting change is something that takes thought, it takes a lot of practice, and it takes really creating a new routine around it. So we hope that this period of time we can jumpstart something, but we know that we're going to have to keep putting in the work to really make it a lasting change in our lives.
Yeah, lasting change requires a lot of investment and a lot of depth, I would say. You mentioned that the Rambam talks about different models of tshuva, and it is interesting that in Perek Zayin, he kind of takes a step back from the tshuva from ma'asim, and he says, wait, tshuva is not only about ma'asim. It's not only like, oh, I spoke lashon hara, I stole something, or I did something wrong, and now I have to be metaken, I have to fix that action. He says, maybe a deeper level tshuva is when we think about traits of ours that we really are challenged by, whether it's anger or whether it's jealousy or whether, it's laziness or all the different things that we as humans are challenged by. And those kinds of processes, we know, are not things that you could just change overnight. They require a lot of work. And at the same time, I think that there are specific actions that we do. You could call them meaningful gestures, but I think they're also, they also have a place. I know that tefillah is a big one for you.
Immersion. It often sounds the same as prayer.
Yes. Yeah. Tefillah.
I know. I never have time with that one. It is meaningful. I can't say that was always the case, but the truth is that years ago, I was trying to figure out how specifically as a mother, I was sort of imparting mitzvot to my children. I know it sounds silly because we're living a whole life of mitzvot with our children together with us, but I was sort of thinking about it, and I ended up incorporating them into candle lighting on Friday night, which is, I didn't grow up with that. I only started lighting candles when I was a married woman, and apropos, a Chabad friend of mine said to me, why don't they light candles with you? And we started doing that together, always since then. My 2-year-old son also lights candles with us and covers his eyes, which is very cute.
One day he'll discover he's a boy. Concrete mitzvah.
I do. I do like concrete. In general, I like things that are concrete. But another thing that I've done with them for, I guess, a decade at this point, maybe 9 years, is also a practice that I did not grow up with, which is going to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur, which is a really interesting experience. I really don't know a lot about policies outside of Israel, so I don't know what that looks like. I know that in Israel, I've lived in multiple cities and I've done this, and it's been fairly simple. And where they have the women's mikveh open for certain hours on Erev Yom Kippur, we're more familiar with the men, going to the mikveh.
Never heard of women going before.
Right. So it's actually a really, really, it's a fairly old custom. So before getting actually to the practical piece, I just wanted to think with you for a moment about why we would do this. I mean, it says the men always do it, so we think about it very naturally. But I think that there are two elements that are reflected in actually this voluntary immersion. One is perhaps that it's some sort of kapara, it's a gesture of some kind of atonement. And for that, we have so many of our biblical texts. And I'm just bringing Dafka, the Mishnah in Yoma and Perek Chet. So it brings us psukim from Yechezkel, where Hashem says to us, Zerachti alechem mayim tohorim v'tiyartem, where it describes, it's a very difficult chapter, but it describes God basically bringing us out of the depths of our loss and our low state and putting pure waters on us, i.e. the mikveh waters. And then also the pasuk from Yirmiyahu of Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, which is a question how you actually translate that. But one of them is that Hashem is actually kind of like the mikveh of Am Yisrael, but it's also, and just like the mikveh waters are sort of purify us, that also our relationship with God does something similar. So the mikvah waters, again, many of us are familiar from like a regular monthly kind of situation from Nida, but it's a similar idea, right? It's not for the sake of a relationship, but it's just the purify element. It's just that side of atonement. And even connecting back to what you said before about these special gestures is that it also could be a gesture of tshuva, that it itself reflects this idea that I want to change, that I want to come out with something different about myself. That idea maybe can be drawn from the fact that a convert immerses in the mikveh, that there's a change in status in who we are. And what's interesting about this, being women going to the mikveh on Erev Yom Kippur, is that there is, of course, a question about whether a woman in Nida can go to the mikveh like this. You don't make a bracha when you go, but with a fear that maybe she'll be confused and she'll think that now she's tehora. And there are opinions that say that this is not permissible, but I also just want to put here, and I'm never a poseket on these episodes, and I'm not giving a clear halachic opinion for anybody, but there are also many opinions that say even a woman who is, let's say, in her, Zayin Nikiyim, that she can actually go to the mikveh during this time. And because you don't have to prepare for this immersion in the way that you prepare to go to the mikveh after being in Nida, that, let's say, just as an example, the Ben Ish Chai says that's why, all the women in his family used to go. And
even
this is in
single
Baghdad.
women.
Even single women would go, because you don't prepare in the same kind of way, and no one's going to come to be confused that now you think that you're permissible, that husband and wife are permissible to one another. So that there definitely is that spectrum of ideas out there. And I just want to say that on a personal level, that it's meaningful for me to share this mitzvah with my children. I also like that again, there's a very big difference here in Sephardi and Ashkenazi traditions, but I like that it's just an open experience of mikveh. Ashkenazim tend to be more private about their tefillot, and some Sephardi traditions tend to be less private about going to the mikveh on a regular basis. This has become a meaningful experience for me with my daughters as a way to prepare for Yom Kippur. And again, it goes back, to that very physical, concrete experience, and sort of taking a very inward kind of avodat Hashem, and just also having clear expressions of what that looks like in our lives.
I've never gone on Erev Yom Kippur, and I've not, taken my daughter. I have 4 sons, and my youngest is a daughter. But hearing you describe it, like there's something very, not just concrete, but like viscerally appealing about entering Yom Kippur. And I know from my husband and for my 4 sons, who he's taken since they're little, it is a very, very powerful experience. And it's making me laugh because I'm remembering one of my sons when he was quite little coming home and being like, Ima, the mikveh, it's so amazing and it's such a good experience. And I really feel bad for you that you never get to go. And I was like, don't worry, I have my opportunity. But there is something about removing it from the Nida experience and bringing it into just this pure tahara, purification experience, not in terms of being, permitted in a relationship, but in front of God, that I think is really
leaves
powerful.
It just for what it is. I just want to remind all of our listeners that that's what mikveh was for all women before they were married, right? That was
when they would go to
in,
the Beit
first and
HaMikdash.
second temple periods. So it's I really appreciate that experience of it just being for what it is, for its own sake.
There's so many different aspects of Aseret Yemei Teshuva and of Erev Yom Kippur that are meaningful and that people could tap into from different angles, whether it's like these concrete actions or it's changing up little aspects of our day, or it's the things that we read or learn or connect to during this time period. And all of it is meant to bring us to Yom Kippur in a way that hopefully is more intentional. And I start thinking about Yom Kippur, and in preparing for this, I kind of like let myself really go there. And I'm always surprised by just like how emotional I get around it. There's so many aspects of the day that even thinking about them just give me chills or make my eyes well up with tears. Starting with the meaningful brachot that many of us get from our parents or we give to our children before the fast starts, which are different than the Friday night brachot, which honestly, sometimes the house is crazy and everybody's like, whatever, and just you take that moment to give the bracha. But on Yom Kippur, not that the house isn't crazy on Erev Yom Kippur, but
we have a hard time with this one.
It's not always simple to get that bracha in.
It's very long.
But we do try to stop and like really think about what we're saying and It is a very, very special feeling. And just the kedusha in the air that I feel as you come into the shul, the big Knesset, and everyone's dressed in white, the men in their kittel and the women in their dresses, and that sense that we spoke about also around Rosh Hashanah, of the entire community coming together, that even at night, like the Ezrat Nashim, the women's section, is filled both for Kol Nidre and then again for Ne'ilah. And so many different aspects of the day, like the Chashbon HaNefesh, the reflection, the introspection, the saying, the Vidoy and the Alchit, the Kohen Gadol, the Avodah that we recount, and really thinking about what it was like to be in the Beit HaMikdash, the bowing that we do together, the reading of Sefer Yonah, the Slichot that we say again in Ne'ilah, all culminating with that blast of the shofar and the singing of Lashana Abba B'Yushalayim, and really this cathartic feeling that I think many of us feel of like, okay, we've successfully completed another Yom Kippur, and hopefully as individuals and as an Am and Medinat Yisrael, hopefully we've merited atonement on this day in which many, many, many years ago, Bnei Yisrael were given atonement after the sin of the golden calf, of the Egel HaZahav. We know this is the day that we believe the second set of luchot were given to us and that Hashem forgave us. And I think all of that is just really... it's emotional, and it's a time for us to reflect and think about how special it is that we have this day. And sometimes because we know that this is the only fast day in the Torah that's D'Oraita, and there's a lot of anxiety sometimes around fasting, and it occupies a lot of space as people are preparing, where they're going off their caffeine or they're thinking about how they'll get through the fast. Instead of just getting through the fast, remember, as you said in the introduction, that Yom Kippur is not a fast like today, Tzom Gedalia. It's not a fast that's connected to mourning or to sadness. Yeah. It's actually, the Gemara describes it as one of the happiest days of the year. An opportunity to merit atonement, an opportunity to merit forgiveness, an opportunity to stand before Hashem in tefillah. And therefore, if we could just think for a moment about the fact that the fasting part of the day, even though it's often difficult, is considered by the Torah the most essential element of the day. The Inoi Nefesh, we say in the pasuk that Vanitem et nafshotechem, that we're supposed to afflict ourselves somewhat through fasting, but that the fasting is so much the center of the day. This is hard for people to hear sometimes, that even if it means not going to shul and not davening at all and staying home in your bed with an air conditioner blasting so that you could get through the fast and successfully fast the entire day, that's actually halachically much more important than having like a uplifting and meaningful tefillah, a prayer experience. So sometimes it's like we're so focused on things that we believe that are the center of Yom Kippur and that are very, very meaningful, that we need to remind ourselves that actually the fast and the atonement part of it is what the Torah believes to be most essential here.
The first thing I just thought of right now is that I guess for many years now, Shayna, and I'm just representing again my little slice of life that some of our listeners might be in also, for many years, for me, Yom Kippur davening doesn't actually start until like Torah reading of the next day. I've found going at night with like a tired baby is very, very difficult. I can't remember anymore. I think the last year, maybe the last 2 years, I went for Kol Nidre and then I went home. Mm-hmm. It's been a very long time since I've been at Mariv on Yom Kippur night. So I'm just putting that out here because everybody has very different experiences of it. And I always remind myself now for, well over a decade that I always tell myself, you just need to get a moment. Do you know what I'm saying? Meaning I want to get the moment. I want to have one moment of real tefillah. I tell myself that. Rosh Hashanah is a little bit easier. But even Yom Kippur, sometimes I also go to Vatikin, or my husband goes to Vatikin, but the nighttime, which brings you into the mood, there's been many years where I wasn't there at that, and I'm sure many others have been there. It's very difficult because everyone really wants to daven, and I really, really respect that space. And I don't appreciate it when people bring children who disturb in something that's so serious. So very many years I've, already not really been there there for that whole experience. And so I've reflected on that with myself, like, oh, Yom Kippur for me only felt like it really started, because it's very hard to build up that kind of energy when you're by yourself in your house. So that's just one thing I was thinking about. I'm not exactly sure what will happen this year. I guess we'll figure it out.
Which again is why I want to emphasize that if you're fasting, like you're doing Yom Kippur.
Totally.
Because there's all different kinds of people who end up not being able to be, part of the tefillah experience.
Right. And then there's also the side of the fasting piece. And I just wanted to bring in here also that women are fully obligated to fast. We're part of the same category here, the seriousness of that mitzvah. And while, of course, there can be health-related exemptions, again, we're not giving up psak here. We're just explaining the way that this can function, whether, medical reasons, maybe some people who are, having health difficulties or older, and many women at different stages of life can also have questions regarding certain times of pregnancy, or nursing is always a very stressful topic surrounding fasting for many women. And there's a lot to be said there. And I will also say that we have some great articles that we'll, of course, link in the show notes that go into more of the details. But I guess I also wanted to ask about why fasting, meaning why do that, right? There we've done a lot. We've done Teshuva, and we've maybe taken upon ourselves more mitzvot. And why do we have to go? Why do we have to go there at all? Like, why is that a tool that I keep using that word, but I like that word. Like, why is it a tool that we use in this time? And I think that, we see many examples in Tanakh where fasting has always been a tool. Start with that. It's always been a tool that we've used.
Something ancient.
It's a way that, just like eating is so central to our lives. So stopping to eat, has all different kinds of impacts on emotional impact on us. And it's used in different ways, even within Tanakh, meaning it could be used as like a visceral response to a traumatic, I'm thinking of Megillat Esther, when the decree goes out to destroy the Jewish people, that we have Eved Gadol Yehudim Betzom Ubchiu Misped Sak Ve'efer Yutza Lerabim, that immediately, right, they cry and they eulogize and they also fasted. And that was sort of like a very visceral response to the decree. But, not long afterward, Esther declares a fast, right? Meaning she takes that same tool and uses it to sort of galvanize the kavanot of the people, or to, first of all, to bring them together in some sort of center. And also the fasting seems to be more of a tool of tefillah, right? Meaning it's a tool to bring people to focus on what they're trying to do. And so it's not a mourning, right? You just said Yom Kippur is not really, it's not a day of mourning at all. But that fasting, if it feels that way for the person fasting, is a tool that's used to help us focus in on, yes, a more spiritual side of ourselves, to focus inward, to be, even on a very basic level, to not be busy preparing food. I mean, my daughters, they prepare their lunches for like 45 minutes. I mean, I don't like it. I like to prepare things very quickly, but like, it's not going to be an occupation of ours for that day. And so it gives us, again, depending on how we feel, gives us an ability to focus on that specifically.
Meaning, in the first example in Esther, it was like very instinctual for them. We're in pain, we're despairing. Like our natural response is to manifest that or express that through fasting. And you're saying, and the other examples are where we're kind of like you could use the word impose, but like impose in a positive sense. We impose this on the community, on the tzibor, so that it could arouse certain feelings in them. Yeah.
And, it also goes back, though, to the word inui that you used before, because the Torah recognizes that fasting has an element, it's uncomfortable. Like, it's an uncomfortable tool. Yeah. It's not that someone wants to be in that space. Yeah. And so the question is, when we're uncomfortable, what is that discomfort achieving for us, right? So just as another example, that in the Gemara in Brachot tells us that Rav Sheshet, that he actually linked fasting to the idea of korbanot, meaning that today we don't actually bring the korbanot. But now he said, I use fasting, right? I use fasting as that tool that sort of, I minimize my own personal body. It used to be that I would minimize or kill, right, an animal, but through fasting, I am sort of turning myself into the sacrifice. And that is very much, again, an idea of kapara, of some sort of atonement. Right. And so the inui is kind of this way. The affliction is sort of like to minimize ourselves. Now, you and I think, are both pretty good fasters,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And I would say fasting while also parenting is difficult, but I've also figured that one out over the years. For people who are not good fasters, everything we just said right now doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Because it dominates and it takes over.
It's a tool that ends up just like a sort of obliterating the outcomes that sometimes can happen, and that's difficult. I mean, we'll just put that here on the table. Like that's difficult and that's frustrating. And at the end of the day,
if this isn't resonating, you're not alone.
Yeah, there are many people who it's very, very difficult for. I do just want to say that I think there's something funny about the way that fasting has become a tool in like the modern language of intermittent fasting that people are doing. Lots and lots of health debates about how to use
you hear
that tool.
people talk about fasting
Constantly, right? Constantly. And it's for different periods of time. But I'm just saying it's interesting to hear how in the broader world, they also recognize fasting as a tool. It's being used as a tool for health.
They also understand that it could have some
and
real
that
effects.
For many people, you get through a very uncomfortable period of it. And then you start feeling the impact of your body starting to burn other elements that are inside. And there's a lot of conversation about the way the brain starts functioning once it starts relying on its own internal resources. And I'll just say that I think you might probably have this experience also where you were really hungry in like the afternoon and then you get to the end of the fast and you're like, oh, I could go for another 6 hours, right? And that's a very true health impact of fasting. And so that's something that gets sort of capitalized.
I thought it was the high of the davening.
I know, you're very from Shayna, but really there's a biological element here, a biochemical element that in the health world, they're really trying to capitalize on it. But I think that some of us have experienced it already for years in our religious lives.
Yeah. Wow, that's really fascinating. I did not know that. I relate very much to the idea. I relate to both ideas that sometimes it's like a outgrowth of how we're feeling, and sometimes it's something that we use in order to engender feelings. And I very much relate to that the fasting leaves me feeling like a little bit less stable, and more vulnerable. My mother always says about when I was a kid, she's like, if only I knew that when you were in a bad mood, it was because you were hungry and I just needed to give you something to eat. She's like, we would have had a whole different experience. So like definitely when I'm hungry, like it definitely leaves me all wobbly. But on Yom Kippur, when I understand, oh, I'm hungry, that's why I'm feeling this way, it does help me feel that sense of vulnerability of standing before God. Like, my life is in your hands, Right. It helps me focus on what's important, but it's true that this all works because it doesn't knock me out. And if fasting really leaves you weak, or if you have terrible migraines, or if you can't function, then it can be really detracting from the experience, and then have to think about how to, best have a meaningful Yom Kippur, even when that's the situation.
Yeah,
which isn't simple.
By the way, I just want to say one thing. I want to go back. You said earlier about slichot and migdal oz, which again, I'm not sure everyone in our audience knows the reference, but it's quite an event. It's very late at night. It's a tremendous amount of singing. I just want to say that, again, going back to the mom track right now, the younger mom track, that very often when I knew that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur were going to be really, really just challenging because of like kids' ages, like I would decide to have a different night. I'm crying. Have a different night be my tefillah. Like that I'm going to slichot tonight and migdal oz, which also for me, I cannot function the day after because I cannot go to sleep at 2:00 in the morning. And obviously there's different versions of this, and around the world you can go to different kinds of tefillot. But I would just decide for myself that this is going to be my moment, and I'm going to ki'ilu take the kavanot I would have had then and put it there, because I know that it's just not going to work this year, like in the alchemy of my family's stage.
That's a great tip. Meaning, like, yes, obviously there's something about the climatic experience of Yom Kippur, but
I just couldn't rely on it.
You can't rely on it.
I know I was going to show up alone, you know what I'm saying? And it was up to my own kavanot.
Find your moment.
Find that moment.
Like you said, find your moment of tefillah, find your moment of Aseret Yemei Teshuva. Let's talk a little bit about the tefillah of Yom Kippur. Is there anything specific that stands out for you, or for you, like that is, the moment of Yom Kippur that deeply resonates?
I think there are several. I'm going to answer you right now really like viscerally. The moment that I know really, really resonates for me, and I could tell you exactly what memory made it powerful, is the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed that we repeat many times in the Seder Avodah, right? That's the main feature of Musaf on Yom Kippur, which unfortunately in many shuls gets run through because for a whole host of reasons.
But now the Sharibo song
now we have
people to focus on it a little bit more.
Song help, but in yeshiva settings, it's really taken. It's done much slower and
very seriously.
And so that was my first experience of it. Was when I was 18 in my year in Israel. We had been here, for a whole 3 weeks, and they took us to Yeshivat Shel Avim. I was in the women's midrasha the first year it opened, and they took us to the yeshiva for davening. And I really had no experience with these kind of tefillot. And I remember that two things happened that were powerful for me. And I'm sure many people who are listening, I didn't come from a community where women used to bow down on the floor. And I never saw that before. You guys bow down to the floor in Great Neck?
Some people did.
Some
not
people
everyone.
did. I don't remember that, and I definitely didn't. And in Israel, the flooring is tiling. And I remember everybody was wearing white, which also it's more an Israeli thing. I mean, people wear white all over, but it's much more ubiquitous here. And I remember everybody bowed to the floor, and you could hear the echo because the floor didn't have carpet, right? You grew up in the States, there's always carpet. Yeah. So there was no carpet, and you heard the echo. For the first time, I had like a visceral window into what I thought that would have sounded like in the Beit Mikdash, because that's what we're saying in the tefillah, that everybody got down on the floor and said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, and it was very, very impactful for me. Ad hayom, like I'll be in a setting that is clearly I'll be in a setting that is like not as meragesh as that one was, but like it brings me very much back into that, and the Yishay Rivo song also did a good job at centering on that.
Yeah, really highlighting
that
that moment. The way the song slows down is like Baruch Shem Kavod. Yeah, there's other also like moments that has less of the physical element of the bowing, but I was thinking like Natana Tokef is often a highlight for people, but I actually really connect to the paragraphs right after Natana Tokef, and again we speak about our vulnerability and how we're like, a leaf blowing in the wind. And then the whole kihila, the whole congregation says together, Va'ata hu melech kel chai v'kayam, but God is eternal and he's all powerful. And there's those moments where we really focus in on God and his kingship and what that means, or what we would want that to mean in the world, going back to the tefillah of Rosh Hashanah of Melucha Kol Olam Kulo B'chvodecha, that we just beseeching God, especially today, especially here in Israel, especially during these hard times, to just show us his presence. I understand why that's so powerful. And your emotion just highlights, again, like the meaningful nature of these days.
I think one other piece that also comes up is the idea of the tunes that we connect to. And sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, because then you could be in a shul and someone doesn't do your tune, and you're like, my whole davening just flew out the window because you did not sing Chamol al Ma'asecha and the tune that I like. So there are also these tunes. Some of them, they're like also childhood tunes. My father, I mentioned the Rosh Hashanah episode, he was like the Chazan. None of those tunes show up here because they're just not Israeli tunes. But other tunes that are very meaningful for me, also the years that we used to daven in the yeshiva in Yerucham, where my husband went, and we also lived there, and some of those also are very meaningful. And there's something about that moment where like dafka, it's not because of surprise, right? We are very into in our modern lives about like things being spontaneous and like things taking us off guard. But I think a lot of our religious lives, because they're cyclical and through a calendar, it's dafka, that moment that we waited for because we did it exactly a year ago. Totally. And they did it and they started it and it was the right tune. Yeah. And then you're just like, I don't know, I'm in a puddle in that moment. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So there's just some of those. Everybody has different ones that move them. But but that for me is also like that moment where you wanted that tune and they did it,
Yeah. It was a real adjustment when we made Aliyah that the Berush Hashanah Yechatevun and Yom Kippur Yechatevun is different here. And it was like, wait, what's going on? What just happened? And there's one Chazan in Alon Shvut who he himself made Aliyah from England. And he always just does one line of that as like a token to all the people who are waiting for that. But already I'd been here 14 years. So, you learn the new tunes and then they themselves take on meaning. I also just want to mention the al-chet for a second, just because it's so overwhelming the
Yeah, I was
list
gonna
of the
say, is that your
halachot.
highlight, Shayna?
No, it's not my highlight. And that's why I wanted to mention it, because it's like you stand there, you're supposed to be bent over, like your back starts to hurt. You're saying one halachot after the next, and it could start to feel very, very rote.
Yeah.
And there's like machzorim, like the art scroll machzor that I grew up on in America, that has in the back like the
the
applications
annotated,
or the annotated version that helps you know how to think about each one. And even that is like a lot. So I, have found that if you could just pick a few,
Totally.
like pick a few that you really struggle with, that you really need
we
to
all
say
have some on the list
about.
that are relevant.
Like some you're like, this doesn't really apply to me. The art scroll does a good job of trying to show you how each one applies to you, but some are a little, far-fetched, but some you're like, yeah. That needs work. So if you could just focus on some that we're sincere about and genuine about, I think that helps. Helps a little bit. Not every line of tefillah has to be as meaningful as every other line, and that's okay. I want to talk now also a little bit about the very end of Yom Kippur, the tefillah that we close the day with, which is Ne'ilah. I don't know about you, but I definitely grew up, and I think many people grew up hearing about like Ne'ilah, which means like, somehow the locking of that, like this time that the gates are being closed and they're being locked, and we have to like get in our last prayers before it's too late.
But then they always say we have till Hoshana Rabbah. So
right, that's also confusing.
It's like, it's kind of the end, but it's kind of like an Israeli end.
So it's a motivating image, but it's a motivating image from fear, which I struggle with and I don't really connect to. And it also paints God as like this adversary who's locking us out. Like we're trying, we're begging, we're fasting, we are in shul, the whole day, or we're struggling at home fasting, and like, why are you locking the doors on us? So that image of God locking us out could actually turn people off and definitely isn't empowering. Rav Amital, who was the founding Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Har Zion, has a very different perspective on it in his amazing book about Slichot and the Yamim Noraim, and it's really affected the way that I think about Ne'ilah. He talks about how in the 5th parak of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which is the Megillah that we read on Pesach, which is a love story, a mashal, an allegory for our relationship with Hashem. So there's this climactic scene where the Dod, who is the male character who represents God, is asserting himself and expressing his love to the Raya, the female character, and begging her to open the door and let him in. And she's already in bed and she's tired and she just wants to get up and put on her clothes and wash her feet and open the door. And so she's not answering him. She's not responding. And then the Dod sticks his hand through the keyhole in the door, and she sees his fingers, and this excites her enough to arouse her and get her out of bed and go open the door. And she's struggling with the lock. And the Midrash takes this pasuk, which starts Kamti ani liftoach ledodi, that I got up to open the door, and the Midrash says that every action in the pasuk actually represents or correlates to another tefillah, another prayer on Yom Kippur, meaning her attempts to open the door correspond to our actions, our tefillot on Yom Kippur. And therefore, Rav Amital says this entirely flips around the image, because he says the image that we should have in Ne'ilah is not us trying to get through a gate that God is locking, but rather God, the Dod, the male character in this story, is trying to get through the door that we have locked. And he's right out there, and he's telling us that he loves us, and he's begging us to open the door. He's pounding on it, and he's saying, let me in. I just want to have a relationship with you. And all we need to do, the Midrash says, is unlock the door, is remove the barriers, is stand there in truth and say, okay, I'm going to let you into my heart. And I found this idea so moving and so powerful and so inspiring that instead of slamming the door in our faces, God is asking us to just let him in to our hearts, and that the Ne'ilah, or the locking image or whatever, is about us finding that key to unlock our hearts and to let God in. And I think that's a much more empowering image in terms of how we close the how we close Yom Kippur.
So it's sort of that us standing there yelling in tefillah is basically us reminding ourselves to be there. It's very much relates to even just the title of God in Search of Man from Heschel, meaning all these images or ideas that flip, right? We get very used to when we're young that we're the little kid and God is the parent. But there are so many ideas, theological ideas and images that flip that. Right? This is one of those examples. It makes me think of a song from Hanan Ben-Ari. I know I always connect everything to music, Shayna, but it was actually his first. If you don't know who that is, anyone listening, then you have some Googling to do, okay? But check him out, one of the biggest, pop stars in Israel, but he's religious and he has phenomenal music and he's an amazing performer. Anyways, so his first single he ever put out was called Mimcha Delai. And he says he has that exact same idea where he basically says, God, why are you always, lama tastir panecha mimeni? Why are you always hiding from me? And the song ends with like a flip where he says, Barachti mimcha delai, I ran away from you and back to myself, v'lo matzati klum, and I didn't find anything. Omed bepetach hadelet, he's taking the image from Shir Shirim, standing at the entrance to the door. Od lo me'ez litfok, but I don't yet have the courage to knock. And then he says, and I didn't see anything. Ve'az sho'eg bepetach hadelet ata yotze pitom. And then he says, and all of a sudden I, meaning finally yell, almost like a lion. And then immediately you come out, right? That idea that all we need is to actually have the courage to open up our hearts, and then God will be there waiting for us. So he's really playing
screaming
with that.
at the end of like, Hashem Hu Elokim, Hashem Hu Elokim is not us trying to get through the gate. It's us trying to open our own hearts to God.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's your takeaway, Yosefa? What are you left thinking about?
I think a lot of things, honestly. I think that this episode we have even more than usual, sort of a whole, just sort of like a panoply of ideas related to the Chag, and hopefully also like tips that could be meaningful. But if I think about myself personally, I guess I'm putting at the center the fact that Yom Kippur is a Chag that ideally goes through the most transformation for us over our lifetime, meaning because we experience it as when we're young, that it's hard and our parents they're less happy and they're grumpier that day. And we I think a lot of us grow up with a distaste for Yom Kippur because it's difficult. And I think that if we can, as we grow up, learn to appreciate it, really see it as the chag that it is, and are able physically to utilize the fast for what it is, then I think for me that's my takeaway, is that really this is a day that's a chag, and that it's a gift. It goes back to, I think, even I feel like what we spoke about when we spoke about the gift that is tefillah, right? The gift that is being able to have that relationship with God. I think that is the joy. It's the opportunity. It's a joy that sits at the root of Yom Kippur. Again, if we're able to tap into it, I think that's something that I'm taking with me.
I was thinking something similar. I guess our heads in the same space, that, when you're little, it's a long day in shul and the fasting, and it's boring and no malacha. And the older you get, the more and more and more we can appreciate this day. And I think one of the aspects that I really appreciate, that I always just want to slow down and focus on, is the Kedusha, like literally the holiness of the day. It reminds me of a paragraph at the opening of Shai Agnon's book on Yom Kippur that I was introduced to by Rabbanit S.T. Rosenberg. Shai Agnon speaks about being a little kid, being 4 years old, and being in the big Knesset with his father, and the sense of like holiness that he felt throughout the day, and that the shofar blew, that last shofar, that culminating blast, and he started to cry. And he said his father and all the adults around him, like no one knew why he was crying. But as a little 4-year-old, he knew why he was crying. And he said it was because as the men took off their talitot and the women, rushed home to get things ready in the house, he felt the atmosphere change. And he felt the kedusha, the holiness, dissipate. And he said even the looks on people's faces, like their faces changed, and they were no longer glowing with holiness. And I know exactly what he means. Like there's this cathartic moment at the end of the day where we really feel this like happiness and relief, and that we're granted forgiveness. And then there's also like this drop. And that drop, could be hard for people who like really got into the intensity of the Yamim Noraim as these 10 days come to a close. And I want to remind myself and remind others, to savor this time, to try to focus in on the uniqueness and on the special aspects and on the holiness, on the Kedusha, to cherish them and to really make the most of them, as you said. And also to think about what we could take with us from there. You know, in America, I felt this minhag less, but in Alon Shvat, like Yom Kippur ends and people eat, and then an hour or two after the fast, you start hearing the banging, and people are literally out starting to put up their sukkah. And in the beginning, I'm like, what? How do people have the energy? I'm like so wiped out after Yom Kippur. But we've really started leaning into that. And there is something very special about taking the Kedusha of Yom Kippur, going home and eating and being like, no, but now like we're out there doing this mitzvah and thinking about how Hashem's Shekhinah is going to stay with us, like in the holiday of Sukkot. So we're not going to do an episode for Sukkot this year, but we want to wish everybody a Gemar Chatima Tova, and also a wonderful and meaningful Sukkot.
Thank you, Shana.
See you next time.
Did this conversation move you or cause you to think about the topic in a new way? Please share these episodes with friends and family and start conversations about meaningful mitzvah observance with all of them. You can contact us with thoughts and questions at womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. That's womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. Looking forward to our next conversation.